All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Liberty Lens. I am your host, Big John, joined as always by my friend and co-host, Mr. Mike Termott. Mike, every week I try to think of something nice to say, like a snappy little intro for you. I have to admit, I'm a little run down this week, so you'll just have to settle for friend and co-host Mike Termott. I hope you're not insulted by that.
No, that's probably itself more than I deserve. It's a good week. It's great to be with you, John. As you and I just discussed, Tulsi Gabbard moments ago received an approving vote from the Senate. So, Trumpers in your audience, take heart.
Trumpers and, let's face it, a lot of libertarians, even though we were a little bit put off by her admitting she might retain the warrantless aspects of FISA 702. But on the whole, I would say that I think not only are Trumpers happy, but libertarians in general. I just did a quick scan of libertarian Twitter or libertarian X. And if I had to guess, I would say it's been 80-20 favorable.
I think you're right. I think that makes sense. And of course, what I like about Tulsi Gabbard is that she's willing to piss off a whole bunch of Democrats and a whole bunch of Republicans at the same time.
Nice.
So, she's got to be doing something right. I also, to be honest, I like and yet have concerns about this memo that she prepared for Republican Senate staff. Let's be honest. It's mostly for Republican Senate staff as much as it is for senators. Political cover for senators, but no one's reading that other than Senate staffers. This is the result of, in effect, a shakedown. We love you, Tulsi, but we're concerned because you haven't been taught to think correctly yet. So we need to make sure that you're going to answer certain questions. On the one hand, you got to like the fact that she's been forthcoming, that she's followed a process that went above and beyond just, I'm Donald Trump's nominee and choice. And so, you people fall in line or the president's going to be mean to you. The fact that it's more sophisticated than that, we like. On the other hand, I do worry, we all know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg made famous her resistance to answering specific questions, right? When she was up for confirmation by the Senate to become a Supreme Court justice, and for cause, for reason, for logical, good, sound practices. You don't want to get pinned down. You don't want to weigh in on specific cases, certainly, because no two are alike. And you need the flexibility to react to the facts as they may change in the courtroom, on the ground in Tulsi's case. And so I'm a little bit concerned that senators are going to start shaking down some of these nominees for specific answers in a premature fashion. But for now, she's in.
She's in. And as a sort of like part B to our confirmation news, the nomination vote, or I guess the confirmation vote for RFK got put off another 24 hours. So by the time this Liberty Lens hits the internet, Mike, we should have an answer because we usually 24 hours or so after we record this is when we.
And as live. You and I have discussed, we all recognize that there are some things about Kennedy that are, shall we say, more or less libertarian than others. But on the whole, I'm really pleased that he has talked about going after a variety of types of what I would call corruption inside of HHS. Most importantly, conflicts of interest, the limited nature of liability to which pharmaceutical companies are held, and real heavy biases against certain types of research being done and how it's being done. If we can fix those problems, then he's libertarian for me, and I would love to see him take a run at fixing HHS. Absolutely.
All right. So, Mike, that wraps up our 5-minute sort of like what's happening now, today, at this moment sort of segment. But our topic for this episode is DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which all along we've said is really not a department. even going back to the campaign trail. But the truth of the matter is that DOGE has taken front and center, both in the public imagination and in the news cycle. I would say there isn't a day that goes by where you don't hear Elon Musk, through the power of X, which we had stated a while ago, you and I, might be an issue for concern right now, because he is in charge of that platform. It'd be no different than if pre-Trump Zuckerberg were in charge of a department under Biden, right? So
Right.
there is that concern, but we could talk about that. But nearly every day you hear something about DOGE identifying some nonsense somewhere, like 50 million. At first it was for condoms in Gaza, then we found out it was for sex education in Mozambique, and so there's all this stuff flying around. But just to level set before I get your comments, I did some research to find out exactly. Let's get it straight. What is DOGE? DOGE was established by rebranding and repurposing the existing United States Digital Services Department, which was originally created by Barack Obama via executive order. So,
and is a White House report, not something that reports to one of the cabinet secretaries. It is not pursuant to a mandate from Congress. It's quite independent, doesn't require Senate confirmation for the people that work there. In fact, I believe it's set up to officially report to the director of the Office of Management and Budget, but that's relatively unimportant. The important aspect is that it's a report to the President of the United States.
Right. It goes directly to the executive branch. And again, all this is done by executive order, right? So there was no congressional approval either. To be fair, for the original Obama version of this department, of this agency, whatever you want to call it, and now that it's been repurposed under and rebranded under the Trump administration. So let's start there. What is the concern of everything being done by executive order here? The very existence of DOGE, the very prominence that Elon Musk now enjoys in the administration, strictly by executive order. Now, Mike, I hate to be the guy who's always like, what about, and I told you so, but I remember plenty of folks, libertarians included, and in my opinion, correctly crapping on the Obama administration, the Biden administration, the G.W. Bush administration by saying, hey, you're not a king. You don't get to rule by fiat. These executive orders, ruling by executive orders, is really nonsense. So how do you feel about this?
There are executive orders and there are executive orders. You need to be able to boss around the executive branch. So if it's, telling people in the executive branch, this is how I want you to do business, I don't have a problem with that. When we get into trouble is, and I'm glad you brought up Barack Obama, who, as a constitutional law professor from the University of Chicago, who understood this well, said, I don't have the authority by executive order during his first term to change how we're going to treat immigrants, right? I can't just unilaterally extend the protection for dreamers in his case. That was going to expire, blah, blah, blah. And then in his second term went ahead and did exactly that, just changed his mind. Right. About what authority he had, or maybe he didn't change his mind. He just changed his mind about how unimportant it was that he didn't have the authority and just did whatever he felt like doing. Right. That's when we get into trouble. I think probably the vast majority of these executive orders, the White House is in pretty solid footing, but he does have a number of executive orders that are in effect impounding resources that Congress has already appropriated and done so in a way that has created an expectation that they would be spent in a certain way. And I think that the White House is going to run into some heartache and disappointment from the courts, because this is fairly settled law, both in terms of written law and having been tested. I don't think that Democrats are going to have to forge a whole lot of new ground here in order to stop the White House from impounding a lot of these resources. we as libertarians, we love the idea of unleashing anybody, but Elon Musk, particularly, some guy with a big ego who doesn't care who's mean to him, right?
Right.
I'm all about unleashing someone like that on the executive branch and let him run around and find all the stupid things that people are doing. By the way, that's not a hard investigation, right?
Right.
You're going to find a whole lot. Whether it adds up to a great deal of money relative to the total budget remains to be seen. But you're going to find any number of silly items to highlight.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point you made, because as libertarians especially, or as old school conservatives, like let's say a Jack Kemp conservative if you're from the 80s or whatever, right? These really economically focused Republicans, which in my opinion have been dwindling in number the older I get, right? But you'd say, hey, what's wrong with cutting down the size of the federal budget and the scope of the federal government? What's wrong with that? And the answer, of course, is there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think there is something to be said for, do the ends justify the means? And I think as libertarians, we have to be principled enough to say no, right? The ends do not justify the means, and that there's a reason why you have to show your work. That we're doing this appropriately and in the right fashion, where there is accountability and there is process.
Well, completely understood. And John, I don't think we're going to get there. I don't think this is going to be one of those nuanced areas where the White House does something, gets its way, impounds a lot of resources, and we're left debating that. I don't think that's going to happen.
You think it'll stop before that?
Yeah, I think it's going to get stopped before that. And so my greatest concern is not that particular debate. And, maybe in a few weeks we will be having that discussion.
Right.
My greater fear is that the White House is going to, in effect, spend some political capital here in a way that is not the most effective for its own cause, for the president's own cause. And I fear that Democrats will, in effect, be lionized against what it is, a lot of what it is that the White House both wants to do and is going to want to do in the future. Because as we were about to discuss, we don't know yet whether all these things are going to add up to a great deal of money in the grand scheme of things, right?
Right.
It is true that 100 billion there and 100 billion there, and eventually you're talking about real money. But we've got to find a way to get to $1 trillion here and there before we're really making a difference in terms of the balance sheet of the federal government.
And I did want to point that out, Mike, not to interrupt you, but to give folks a size of the scope here, because I think you hear things like 50 million bucks potentially for condoms, and I've actually got some of these numbers. DOGE is claiming, and this is Musk, that they've already achieved an average of approximately $1 billion in savings daily through budgetary cuts. Now, those play fast and loose with terms there, right? Cancellation of DEI contracts. Roughly 85 DEI contracts canceled, totaling nearly $1 billion. 12 contracts with government services in the Department of Ed were canceled, totaling $30 million. 12 underused leases were terminated for $3 million. Like, this sounds like a lot of money to the average person. But let's put this in perspective, because I did a breakdown of the actual federal budget by category. For example, if we were to eliminate every single penny of foreign aid, every single penny under all its guises, USAID, everything, that would amount to roughly 1.2% of the federal budget.
Right.
So while we agree that there's ideological issues with saying, let's send money overseas, let's fund these, in some cases, I think all of us would admit, absolutely ridiculous federal expenditures, we're still talking a drop in the budget. And when you combine it with the proposed debt ceiling increase that the Trump administration wants, you're still losing ground. So
you're not getting to where you need to get.
Exactly. Excuse me. But So to that extent, I think where people, and listen, rather than spend 50 million, I'd rather save it. Absolutely. But I think in the grand scheme of things, while these numbers and I think this is where Musk and Trump do a good job. They're getting the populism going by throwing these numbers out. And literally the one that sticks out is 50 million for condoms, right? You think of that and it's like, Jesus, how many condoms does that equate to? Like, why 50 million? Couldn't we get them on sale or something? But I think it's purposely done, masterfully done from a marketing perspective. But let's ground ourselves here. It's really a drop in the bucket, isn't it?
It is a drop in the bucket. And if it were up to me, as someone who's worked as an economist in the Office of Management and Budget in the past, and whose job it was to teach people in OMB how some of these procedures are supposed to be followed, this is not at all how I would have gone about it, because I do fear the White House is going to end up wasting significant political capital.
Right.
I think that the way they should have done it is, yes, release Musk and his team, identify the dopiness, list it, read it on off of a clipboard in the Oval Office with your 4-year-old on your head, if that's, how,
right.
If that's the look you want. And maybe I wouldn't have done that, but,
right.
That's fine. All of that is good. But because you didn't stop short, if you had just stopped there, but you didn't, because you didn't, and you went ahead and shut down these programs, now you're going to get stuffed in court, because these are largely settled issues. Right. Congress was already mad at Richard Nixon. I mean, this goes back a while, when Nixon decided he didn't want to spend certain money, and good for him for, wanting to exert his own influence and had his own ideas. But as the district court in Rhode Island has already pointed out, misalignment with the president's goals and values doesn't count. And the reason it doesn't count is not because of a reading of the Constitution or how the court feels or because he's a Democrat. The reason it doesn't count is because that's what the law says. The law has been signed into law. It's been tested in court. These are settled issues. And so I'm afraid now the White House could challenge all of that in court all over again, the constitutionality. We could bring it all the way to the Supreme Court. I'm just not sure I want to go to the Supreme Court over such a small amount of money as a couple $100 billion. But, that could play out in the White House's favor. I just wouldn't be optimistic. What I would have done is stop short, bring attention to all these dopey expenditures, and then say, now that we have highlighted, now that we have lifted the rock, now that you know how silly some of this stuff is, we're reaching out to Congress, and this includes, Democrats that want to be on the right side of politics and the right side of history,
right,
to help us out, not only to impound the resources correctly to stop this particular silliness, but let's be honest, we need to start saving trillions. And at that point, you would have such political momentum that you would get the couple of Democrats that you need. If you hold every single Republican, you won't, but you probably won't. So it would help to have a couple of Democrats on your side in a 53-47 majority Senate. And you could go after, for the first time, what it is that we really do need to go after, and that's entitlement programs.
Right. And so I agree with you, because like you said, those entitlement programs, we're talking about Medicare, Medicaid,
and Social Security.
Social Security. And let's throw this in there because it's the next biggest chunk of it's defense spending as well.
Yep.
So when you put all that
Absolutely.
together, you're talking about 60-70% of the budget. Like I said, all of foreign aid, which has been the conundrum and the rallying cries for the entire election season, America first, no money for anybody else. And this has been incredibly steady over the years, between 1 and 1.5% of the federal budget total.
Yep.
So you're really focusing on the wrong thing, but it's a great political point to make. Very quickly, you mentioned the court system putting the brakes on some of these. Already we have a couple. I just want to rattle them off real quick, Mike, since you mentioned it. A federal judge has blocked DOGE from accessing sensitive Treasury Department data and systems. That came out of New York. A court paused a deadline for deferred negotiations offered to federal workers. We discussed this last week. Judges have ordered the administration to unfreeze billions of dollars in federal funding that DOGE had attempted to freeze. Courts have blocked executive orders and other moves by DOGE too. For example, rewrite the Constitution by outlawing birthright citizenship, block spending programs already approved by Congress, which you just mentioned, cutting federal funding to hospitals, researchers, and others, laying off large numbers of federal employees, all blocked. So while a lot of what Musk has claimed have been in savings, if we're being really precise, he is claiming to have identified these savings, but not actually realized these savings. And just to show that the courts are there, it's not just if people have the perception that it's leftist activist judges who are the only ones blocking Trump in his holy mission. Really, it's not. Two examples: Judge Carl Nichols, a Trump appointee, is the one who blocked the plan to put 2,200 U.S. Agency for International USAID staff on leave. So it was an actual Trump appointee that said, no, you can't do that. And then Judge Joseph LaPlante, he was actually appointed by President Bush. He put an end to Trump's executive order that aimed to restrict birthright citizenship. So the perception that it's only been activist liberal judges that have said, hey, let's put the brakes on some, maybe the majority have, because let's face it, litigants will go judge shopping for these things, right? But it's also been some Republican/conservative appointees that have also.
Well, you're exactly right, both in terms of plaintiffs going judge shopping, but it's also true that conservative judges are going to give the White House a hard time. Most of this stuff is fairly settled law. I think it's the White House's calculation that by running with a lot of this stuff by executive order, they will build up political capital. And I just don't believe that that is a correct calculation. I mean, I wish them luck for purposes of getting the savings that we all want, but it does leave a little bit of potential chaos if the White House does get its way, because there will be a bit of a constitutional showdown there. And I just think that politically, to be most effective, most successful in the long run, what the White House needs to do is to highlight all of this crap and use it to make its case, and then to try to move legislation in that warmer and more fuzzy environment with Congress. And I think that they would have a great deal more success. I do think, John, the next step has to be to go after entitlements. I just don't think that this, the squeeze here is worth it. The amount of work that it's going to take, even if you were to win these cases, even if you were to get a judge to roll over, even if you were to go all the way to the Supreme Court and have some of the Impoundment Act of 1974 thrown out in whole or in part, which I don't think they're going to be successful in doing. But even if you were, that's going to take the rest of the year. And by then, nobody knows what holy hell will have been wrought that will have undermined the White House's focus, the American people's focus. I really think that the thing to do is to leverage what a lot of people are seeing, which is Musk doing a good job. They may not like the way that he's doing it, but they recognize that a lot of this is just logical, that it should be straightened out. I think that if you were to leverage all those good feelings, then go after entitlements, you would have an opportunity. I can't predict the level of success, but you would have an opportunity of doing what it is that we absolutely need to have done.
And to your point, Mike, there is sort of like a clock that's ticking, as crazy as it sounds, in the sense that, Trump, for all his bluster, really just got into office. It hasn't been 100 days yet for his second term, right? So, but there is the sense that there's a clock ticking because historically, midterm elections go against the party that's in power, right? Historically, I think it's only been bucked twice in U.S. history, right? So there's a clock ticking in that sense. And now, if you throw on top of it my proposal, which again, I freely admit I stole from Jack Kemp when I used to follow him around like a lost puppy before I saw the light. Um, what about the concept that you pass not a constitutional amendment, but you pass a law that says um, spending cannot increase? Because his assumption was our economy is strong enough where if you just froze spending, didn't even have to cut anything, just kept it where it is today. Now, when Kemp was running for vice president in the 80s, late 80s, his figure was in 7 years, you would eliminate the debt and have a surplus. If you just kept spending flat. Now it might be, obviously, since the debt has grown, you might have to go 10, 12 years at with no, increases. Tell me your thoughts about that, even at the risk of you having to call me a prag libertarian, Mike. I want you to talk to me. And would that give us that political runway to then attack entitlements, right? Because
I
you
think that is exactly the prescription that is required. I have talked for a long time about the need for a federal spending cap. I would cap it nominally so that if there were any inflation, it would erode the federal government's ability to spend. And I would not let it move with a proportion of GDP. So you'd have two reasons why GDP, both in a real sense and in a nominal sense, would outpace and eventually diminish the relative size of government. I think that's exactly the right thing to do. And I would umbrella that cap on spending all the way across entitlements.
Yes.
So that it would automatically pinch on how much you can spend on Social Security, on Medicare, and on Medicaid as well. Tax cuts are lovely. We all love us some tax cuts.
Not enough.
But the truth of the matter is that all government spending is theft. All government spending is going to be a tax on us, whether it's a tax up front, a tax later on, or whether it's monetized by the Fed and turns into inflation. One way or another, it's going to be a tax on us. And so the only way to solve this problem is to stop the government from spending so much money. And at the very least, we need to do that in relative terms. By the way, I'm a huge Jack Kemp fan. I did a little bit of work for that 96 Dole Kemp campaign.
There you go.
And just thought that he was the greatest thing since sliced bread when he was hanging around Washington. I thought that he was spot on. His focus on the economy and on creating opportunities for everybody to participate in the economy rather than what we used to call in those days affirmative action, which of course these days we call DEI. He wasn't having it back then, but he was extremely proactive in terms of creating opportunities for everybody. And that is exactly the right attitude. So yeah, I was a huge Jack Kemp fan, but to your point, we need a cap on overall federal spending. That would give us the leverage to go after entitlements as well as everything else, and gives political cover to Congress, because no Congress is going to vote to limit specific programs. Right. But they might, if the political momentum were sufficient, they might vote for the overall cap if the White House were able to make the case we're rational, we're sane, we're looking out for your interests in the long run. Look at all the crap that Elon just found by turning over these rocks. Now you can trust us when we say the debt is working against our national interest and what we need to stop right away. You have that conversation with the American people, you can achieve something that can actually preserve our Constitution.
Yeah, and what the subtleties of it to what you just said, the subtleties of it is that if you kept that spending cap and made it a solid value, not a percentage, a moving thing of GDP, like you said, it forces you and this is where it plays hand in hand with something like Doge or Musk, right? Because man, seniors haven't gotten a social security increase in 3 years in this magical world of capped spending, right? Well, Elon just identified all this wasted money. Let's cancel those programs, take that money, reallocate it to Social Security.
All of a sudden, every Democrat in Washington is on your side.
Right. And you've kept spending the same, right? So it is in reality doing exactly what you and I would do with our household budgets. Our income hasn't changed. We've just reallocated our what's it called, disposable income. There'll be times when I can afford to go to the movies. There'll be times when I prefer to eat than go to the movies, right? So, but my budget is the same, right? And I think that sort of political reality kicks in when you're like, okay, so maybe I'm not going to spend 50 million on condoms. Maybe I'll spend it on something that the people actually want. But the law is forcing me to stay in this cap. So I've always felt that was the way to go. I know it's not radical.
Absolutely the way to go. It also creates a very different political dynamic because right now, all too many people in the American public believe that if you were to spend $50 million on such silliness, it's tantamount to free money, right? There's no real cost to it. But if you were to cap overall spending, all of a sudden, okay, you spend that 50 million on something silly. It's got to come out of something, something
Not
else.
silly.
It's got to come
Not
out of
silly.
another line item. All of a sudden, it's like,
Right.
whoops.
What do you think about and I know we're deviating slightly, but what do you think about if the president had the ability to line item veto specific items in the budget? Would you be pro or against that?
Philosophically, I love the line item veto because it's a way to cut spending, right? The problem is that it cedes a great deal of authority to the White House and therefore allows Congress to pass all kinds of crap and then blame the White House for not vetoing it, right? So, there's going to be games played either way. It's not a silver bullet,
Right.
I like the effect of it, but in the long run, I'm afraid that it would be eventually abused.
And who was the last president who had the line item veto?
That's a great trivia question.
You know the answer or no?
No.
I think it was Clinton. And it was the last time we had a balanced budget. I'm almost positive that's the case.
It is the last time we had a balanced budget. He had a strong economy and he had a Congress that wanted to do the right thing. He also had the correct messaging, right?
Yes.
And he corrected course in terms of his messaging when he lost that first midterm election.
Yep.
He was nothing if not a chameleon surviving politician. So, in some weird sense, good on him.
Yeah.
But we need strong leadership. We have that now in the White House. But I would like to see it focused on cutting real spending and doing it in a way that creates political momentum instead of creates pushback from the courts. And I'd like to see it create a vehicle through which everybody in Congress can get on board. That's what I would like to see.
And on that note, Mike, I'm going to end it on the $64,000 question for you. Parts A and B. Part A, does DOGE accomplish any real savings, any real effect? And part B, how long do you think Elon Musk sticks it out at DOGE? We've already seen Vivek booted out of DOGE, right? For the most part.
Yeah, which is a sad irony because Vivek had done some real strong work on how to get rid of agencies, how to get rid of people. By the way, at MikeTremont.com, we've got a summary of some of the tactics that can be employed to pare back federal expenditures if there's any real budget nerds out there. In answer to your question, DOGE outlasts Elon by an order of magnitude, and the effect of DOGE outlasts DOGE by another order of magnitude. In other words, Elon, he could be gone in a month or two. That wouldn't surprise me. Possibly sooner, possibly later. He's certainly not going to be around until the midterms. he's a short-term player in this regard. DOGE will last longer, good for it. I don't think it's going to find the kind of money that you and I know needs to be impounded. But I would be optimistic that in the long run, multiple administrations, right? 2, 4, 6, 8 years, 10, 12 years, we will look back and say that DOGE had started something kind of interesting, easy for the American public to understand, and something of which they will demand more in the future. It'll be called something else under someone else's administration. It'll come back in different forms. But I think that the days of putting rocks on top of stupidity instead of turning them over for a while, that's done.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, everyone. This has been another episode of Liberty Lens with my friend and co-host here, Mr. Mike Termott. Please go to MikeTermott.com. As Mike just mentioned, check out all the great information he has there.